ヨーロッパにおきますですね、ハンターの減少の、要因、原因というものが何なのかということをお伺いしたいのと、それからそのハンターが減少していってる中で、それぞれの国はハンターの増員のための何らかの努力を行っておられるのかどうか伺えますでしょうか。
それはすみません、それぞれの方にということで、
まさにそれぞれの方にお聞かせ願えれば。
I think in general, young people today in Europe are not interested in hunting. They're more interested in sitting in front of their computer screens, playing games. It is less energetic than going out, and they can go to McDonald's to get their meat. So there is a real problem, I think, with the youth, and I think the same as in this country. The restrictions on firearms means that it is much more difficult, and people don't want to spend the time or the effort in trying to get firearms, particularly for young people. So as the years have gone on, in the UK, I don't know about Italy or certain other parts of Europe, but probably 30 years ago, every young man growing in the country was taken out to shoot things, whether it was birds or animals or ungulates. And the government would have had no interest in that. Now, to use a firearm, you have to be over 14, and the chances are that age will go up. So it is becoming more difficult for young people to get into it. But I think from one of the things that is different in terms of the hunter situation in the UK is that because the landowners control all of the hunting, it is very difficult, even if somebody gets a rifle and can go out and shoot ungulate or shoot deer, they cannot actually find a landowner who will give them permission to do so. So it's almost a catch-22 situation. It's just one of these situations where your hunter has difficulty in getting a gun, gets a gun, and then can't find anywhere to go and shoot deer, despite the fact there are hundreds of thousands of deer out there. I don't know whether you want to ask.
Maybe we can add that in many countries now hunting is seen like a sort of immoral activity. I mean, children thought that hunting is bad. This is the general point, and in society is difficult to find, especially in cities, a good attitude toward huntings and hunters.
その2つ目の質問で、そうしたシビアな問題の前に何らかその対処をしようという動きがあるのでしょうか。お伺いできますでしょうか。
I think the answer to that is yes, but it is a very difficult battle to win. So wherever possible, the hunters' federations are trying to bring on young people, but as I say, the constraints that they are working under are actually probably too great to allow us to dramatically increase the number of hunters. So one of the things that we are trying to do, in the same way as Igota-san was talking about this morning, is to improve the efficiency of the hunters, so that the hunters actually do more, but yes, bring them in earlier. And I think the other thing that I probably failed to mention is that most people now, particularly with hunting deer, which takes time, they just do not have the time in their lives to spend a long time either learning about hunting or doing hunting. And young people in particular are very impatient and want things to happen now rather than waiting till tomorrow or the next day.
Okay. Now, one further point is that, generally speaking, in the countries in which hunting has caused the most important, the worst problem, hunting is seen like bad activity. My country, I mean, we had 1.7 million hunters in the 70s. Now we have less than 600,000. But it's a fact that a lot of wildlife suffered for indiscriminate hunting done in an improper way. In the part of my countries where hunting was properly managed, hunters have a very good reputation. For instance, in the Alps, and no one thinks that a hunter is a bad person. He is simply a normal citizen.
ました。
他いかがでしょうか。
マルコ・アルポロニオ先生にお尋ねします。狼のによるイノシシのあるいは捕獲による狩猟による影響というのが非常に小さいというお話がありましたけれども、狼の生息数とそれからハンターの数にはだいぶ開きがあるかと思うんですが、その辺の数はどういうふうな形になっているかを教えていただきたい。でもう一点は、ノロジカに対して狼はどのような影響を及ぼしているかを教えていただきたいと思います。
No, we have found no impact at all also on roe deer. And this was true both at the Italian level then on European level, because we did have not brought the results here. The same work I showed for wild boar for roe deer, and the outcome was that roe deer was limited by predators in Northern Europe, where productivity was scarce and density of roe deer was limited, but it was not limited in Southern Europe, where the environment was very productive and the density of roe deer was very high. So no chance for wolves and lynx to reduce the number of roe deer in Southern Europe.
ありがとうございました。
マルコ・アポロニオ先生にお願いします。イノシシの被害対策に対してハンター専門士の育成、すみません、もう一回マルコ・アポロニオ先生にお願いします。ご報告の中にイノシシの対応などにハンター、専門士の育成などの対応を話されたかと思うんですけど、日本の調査、私たちのプロジェクトで、分かったことは、そのハンターの育成ももちろんこれから政策上、やらなきゃいけない一つの大事なことなんですけど、もう一歩、今までよく言われているように、その中山間地域っていうか、その耕作放棄地などを散々増やしているところの社会において、いかにそのイノシシに強い社会づくりをしていくかという方面で、そのコミュニティレベルの対応、いわゆる個々の農家だけじゃなくてコミュニティ、地域社会の生活組織の一つでコミュニティとか町内会、それはその一体化を図って対応するという話も日本では結構出されていて、それは日本の地域社会においてしっかりしたコミュニティがあるからそういう話あるのか、それともヨーロッパでも一般的にそういう話出ているか、それについてヨーロッパの文脈においてコミュニティレベルの対応、地域社会における地域社会に限定してみるときにコミュニティの対応という話があるかどうかを教えていただければと思います。よろしくお願いします。
If I have correctly understood your question, I can answer this way. In terms of Europe, we have a policy that is oriented towards a reduction of agriculture. European community pay subsidies to landowners that stop cultivating their fields. This is because our problem is, sad to say, overproduction in many fields. And this is one of the reasons of the increase of wildlife. If we move to another scale, to small scale, speaking about damages, one way that is sometimes successful, not only in my country but also in other European countries, to involve hunters in damages prevention is to get them the responsibility of a certain area. And to say, for instance, to a hunting team, okay, if something happened in your area, you are responsible and you pay. And what you can do is to make some agreement with landowners and come very quickly when they say, I have a problem, and try to solve the problem. And this is more or less the way we are trying to use to not solve, but to face the problem. For instance, hunters give for free their time to put fence out when some cultivation are in danger. This is more or less the thinking.
大丈夫ですか。少し補足を、今の質問は多分ヨーロッパの方には難しいかと思うんですけども、日本の農地の状況とヨーロッパの今回来ていただいた方の先生方の地域の農地の状況というのは全く違う環境だと思っていただいた方がいいと思います。日本というのは非常に農地の規模が狭くて、山の奥に、はっきり言えば今後将来的に日本の総人口が確実に減る過程の、厳しい言い方をすればかなり高い確率で10年20年先には消える集落のあたりで鳥獣被害が起きている。そうすると、厳しい言い方をすれば国策としてはお金を投じることが難しい地域で、イノシシの問題なんかが深刻化しているわけですね。そうすると、地方行政に何かを助けを求めてっていうのは今特別措置法があったりして使えるお金はありますけども、それを恒常的に何か求めるというのは正直厳しい状態である。でそこで被害対策をやろうと思った場合にはやはり地域がそこに住んでいる市民が自主的に基本的には守るという気持ちを持たないと何もできないというのが多分日本の実態であるわけですね。でヨーロッパの場合には少しそこから先を行っていてというか農地自体がまとまっていて、田舎とは言っても日本よりも農業規模は大きい。で農家の総人口に対する農家の数も日本よりずっと少なくなっている状態ですので、そういう意味では保障の話ですとか対策の費用を誰が出すのかっていうのを日本とヨーロッパで直接比べてしまうと、混乱する話になるかなと思います。他いかがでしょうか。
ピーター・ワトソン先生にちょっとお伺いしたいと思います。アニマルウェルフェアの件なんです。ウェルフェアにつきましては私の、個人的な考えでは、先ほど出た、狩猟に対する悪いイメージを払拭させるためという非常にプラクティカルな、目的もあるんじゃないのかなというふうに思うんですけども、その、印象が正しいのかどうなのかというのが1点。それから、ウェルフェアに関しての議論が進んでいるというふうに聞きましたけども、それはどのような場で行われているのか、コミッティのようなものがあるのか、あるいはガイドラインがあるのか、そのあたりを教えていただければと思います。
To take your second point first, the discussions really have started in the Netherlands. I said in my presentation that hunting is illegal in the Netherlands. Recently, on a place called the Oostvaardersplassen, they reintroduced ungulates to try and produce a habitat for wading birds. It is a very important site for wading birds. Unfortunately, some years into the project, the animals that were introduced, the ungulates were introduced without any predators, including no human intervention. And so the animals started to die, although this is a very, very large area, and although it is a fenced area, but the animals started to die, and unfortunately, because of a lack of resources, and the animals unfortunately started to die by the railway track, where people going to work in Amsterdam and Antwerp could actually see these dead animals lying at the side of the railway. And so the discussion then started in the Netherlands as to whether humans had the right to put animals into a place to do what we wanted them to do, and yet have no responsibility for managing that population to reduce or eliminate suffering. And so that started the discussion in Europe, and there has been an international commission that has worked on the Oostvaardersplassen for the last 4 or 5 years, and they have now introduced culling, but on a very small, on a reactive scale rather than as a general policy. But they have recognised that without predators in the system was always was almost doomed to failure. So the discussion started with that commission, and is being led by a Professor Frauke Ohl from University of Utrecht. And I think there have been at least 2 international conferences, one in Australia, and there's one planned in Utrecht in July this year, to start the discussions, at which the discussions will start not only about domestic animals and companion animals, but also about wild animals. And to go back to your first point about the hunters, I think the reason that we are interested is that Marco talked about this business that hunting is not acceptable. Well, it is not acceptable because we are working with a construct that is based on domestic animals. It is not based on the wild when we are talking to people from the city. And so I think we need to educate the general public, and hunters need to be really involved in this, to educate the general public that animals do die. And humans have been, as Marco has pointed out, have been predators of wild boar and other ungulates for thousands of years, and we mustn't forget that. But that's why I think it is important when we talk about venison, about the meat, that we killed animals initially for meat, and that we shouldn't forget that that's what we do as a species. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I'm not sure whom I shall address this question to, but my question is about wildlife management and land ownership. Well, as even though we make such elaborate wildlife management system, if without any cooperation with the landowners, I think you can't do anything. And with all these anti-hunting sentiments coming up, there should be a lot of anti-hunting landowners or even anti-management landowners. So I'm from the northern province in Japan, in Toyama, and even in our province, there are groups who are buying land to prevent hunters from hunting bear or even doing management on bear. So I'm sort of familiar with what's going on in Germany. There's been a law case, and in Germany, I think if you're a landowner, your land is forced to be hunted. But what are the situations in other countries which you guys are working on?
I think if we take the UK as being the area where the landowners dominate, in Europe certainly, where landowners dominate most in the discussions, there are clearly a large number of landowners who do not support management of any species, and in particular what we might call the iconic species, red deer, or if we had them, things like wolves. So the only way that we can work is by collaboration with government, collaboration with the hunters. But you're right, specifically collaboration with landowners. And with the small scale of land ownership or the small size of land ownership in the UK, which I guess is similar in some ways, and Kaji-san can put me right, to Japan, it means that you are dealing with hundreds and sometimes even more landowners, but you have to find enough landowners that will agree and then, in a way, work around those people that will never allow you to kill animals on their land. And so we do look for a critical mass of landowners who will work with us, and then respect the rights and the views of the people that do not wish to see animals killed, because we're tending. I've just fallen into the trap of talking about management as if it is all about killing animals, when actually management is all of the range of the tools, whether it is fencing, whether it is feeding, whether in the future it will be population control through contraception. But we've got to recognize that killing is not the only way to manage wildlife populations. And so we've got to find a way of dealing with each of those landowners in a way that is acceptable to them. And it is a challenge. But that's probably why ungulates are still growing in number in the UK.
火事です。お名前が出たので日本では基本的に自由飼料ですね。自由飼料ですので、土地のプライベートランドであっても、ここに入ってほしくないっていう意思表示をしなければ基本的に飼料ができます。その面で、日本はもう少し裁量といいますか、融通が利くと思います。でもう一つは日本のその森林の、多くは、国有林と地方が持ってまして、これまでなかなか土地の管理をめぐっていろんな考え方もありましたけども、この数年はですね非常に協力的で、例えば北海道ですと森林の 60% 以上は国有林を持ってますけども、最近は北海道の州政府とですね非常に協力関係を持って動かすことができているという面ではヨーロッパよりはですねやりやすいんじゃないかと思います。もちろん先ほど高橋先生がお話ありましたように日本の中でも非常にアニマルライツの考え方がですね一切殺すのはダメという団体もあります。ですけども大多数はですね今の鹿イノシシの問題、クマの問題について共通認識を得られつつあるのではないかなというふうに認識しております。
いかがでしょうか。大丈夫ですか。
続いてよろしいでしょうか。引き続きちょっとお聞きしたいんですけど、先ほどアポロニオ先生からヨーロッパ全体の餌付けの話がありましたね。なかなか私たちには理解できにくいところがあります。で冬季冬にですね鹿イノシシに給餌をするというのは私たちから見るとどうもワイルドライフ野生動物を家畜のように管理してですねストックをと高めるという狩猟文化といいますかそういうものが背景にあったんではないかと。でそういう中で今増えてしまっているのもあってじゃあ現在どういうふうに給餌というのを考え直そうとしているのかまたは再認識しようとしているのかについて、お話を伺えればと思います。
Thank you. But this is a very clever question that unfortunately does not find clever countries to answer this question because, for instance, in my country, just to speak about our problems, we are feeding wild boar with the purpose of having more wild boar, even if they are increasing and even if they are causing a lot of damage. And the reason is that there is a big conflict between wild boar, hunters' team, and people making agriculture. Because there's an obvious conflict of interest. The first want a lot of wild boar to be killed. Also because this is a sort of black economy business. Because if a team is able to hunt, as it is in some part of my country, 200 wild boar per year, and if these people are not allowed but are able to sell this meat, they make an awful amount of money. They can buy new dogs, they can buy more food, and then can have some profit. On the other hand, people having vineyards are not happy about that, but they have no means to prevent these people to do these things, because they do that in an unofficial way very often, and they are not easy to be controlled. On the other end of the distribution, there are countries like Austria, where it is mandatory to feed animals. And this is particularly strange to be considered, because in the same countries, they have an amount of damages to forest that is comparable to the one you showed us this morning. And so it is absolutely in contrast the fact that the law, that is a very old law, is the so-named Reichsgesetz. It came from the time of Germany ruling Europe and so on, 1938, prescribed that ungulate had to be fed. And this law is still in force, even if they have a lot of damage and they complain for this damage. And I mean, the obvious point is say, okay, you don't want damage, stop feeding the animal, they will crash during winter, and that's it. But this is difficult to persuade people to change attitude if they are well eradicated. And this can be the answer.
I have two questions for Dr. Igota. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
それぞれの先生に質問なんですけど、日本だと殺された動物たちはその利用とかあんまなしに処分されてしまうって聞いたんですけど、ヨーロッパではその殺したっていうか狩猟で取った動物たちはその商品として取り扱ってるのかっていうのと、そのもし商売として成り立っているなら、その野生動物ってその一定で取れるわけではないじゃないですか。それでその変動にどうやって対応しているのかっていうことを聞きたいです。
Can I answer that to start with? That was the first of my questions to Dr. Igota, was that, as I said, I think in my presentation, that dumping meat would not be acceptable in Europe. So all of our meat has to be exploited. And until probably 10 years ago, there was a decline in meat eating in Europe generally. Not a huge decline, but a decline. And in particular in game meat. So people were not eating as much game meat as they had in the past. Whereas now we have a great culture of celebrity cooks, celebrity chefs on television. And one of the things that the celebrity chefs have done on television is they have raised the profile of cooking game. And they have done, as Dr. Igota said, raised the profile of the value of it as a slow food, high in protein, low in cholesterol, all of the things that are now considered to be good. And so we have seen a real revival to the extent that in the UK, until 2000, we used to export 80% of our deer meat to the rest of Europe. Since 2000, now, this year, we eat 80% of the deer meat we produce, and only 20% goes to Europe. And that is the males during the rutting season when we wouldn't want to eat them, so we give them to the Italians and others. So I think it can be exploited. And I was going to ask Dr. Igota, although it may not be possible to exploit it in this country at the moment, have you looked at other markets such as China, or other markets that might take the deer meat in the short term until your chefs, he's rather more more deer meat than they do at the moment.
日本でジビエの商業利用は可能です。ですがジビエを食べる文化がマイナーなので、それが一番の問題で、私も理想としては収穫した鹿なりイノシシは全て私たち国民が食べるとかおっしゃいますように、中国に輸出するとかしてしっかり利用するべきだと考えてますけども、やはり文化の問題が、壁になっています。ただ需要も少しずつ伸びていることは確かで、北海道のエゾシカでも、そうですけども本州の方でも、鹿イノシシの、衛生的な、処理をしている処理場も非常に増えています。で現時点でエゾシカの場合ですと、約、10万頭とか11万頭とか捕獲されている中で流通に回っているのはたった1万頭ぐらい、10% ぐらいになっているんですが、その残りの9割のうち、何割かは自己消費を当然、していますけども、何割かは残念ながら廃棄されているというのが、現状です。ですから先ほどピーターさんがおっしゃったみたいなキャンペーン、セレブなシェフに使ってもらうとか、そういうことをですね日本でもこれから伸ばしていって、多くの人がジビエを食べるという文化を昔にも日本は薬を食べるという文化として山の幸ジビエを食べていた時期がありましたので、それをもう一度再認識をして、新しい文化を作っていくということが非常にこれから一つのキーになってくると思っています。